It's New Comic Book Day, so let's talk about the one issue today that is going to be dominating conversations. Hi, I'm Jordan the Nerd of Gold, and yeah, the Batman Deadpool story that is the title story in this was a fun story. I really enjoyed it, but I do want to say that overall, throughout this whole issue, the highlight for me out of all these stories is the artists working on this book. The artists killed it. They did such a good job in each and every story. I think that is the thing that really made me enjoy each and every story the most, because the nature of crossover stories is that they have to be fun, they have to highlight both characters and worlds, but they can't really have any lasting consequences because neither company really wants to deal with that. These are just supposed to be kind of fun little events. Maybe we'll have some lasting crossover consequences coming down the line with future crossover issues, but none of these stories in here are going to be like things the characters remember or going to be dealt with in any of the ongoing books. Sorry about that. But yeah, so let's talk about it. Grant Morrison wrote the marquee story here, the Batman Deadpool story, and it is a fun story. I think it's also probably the most self-indulgent meta story Grant has written in a good while. That being said, I don't think it's bad, but I also will say that I don't think Grant is necessarily the best Deadpool writer in the world. And when you have the second half of that character not performing as well, I think that does hamper the story just a little bit, which isn't to say that this was a bad story by any means. I still really like Grant Morrison's work, but I don't think this was necessarily one of the stronger bits of Grant Morrison writing, in my opinion. I don't, with all due respect to Grant, I still love everything you do, basically. But yeah, this was a very meta story. I was super excited to see Sandra Nova in there, the writer from Animal Man, the Cosmic Keyboard. All of this was little fun stuff in there, referencing back the Suicide Squad mission from way back in the 90s. Oh, that was all great little stuff. I loved all these little things. But yeah, it was a fun little story. I think definitely Dan Mora's art is the highlight of that story, though, for me. Because, again, the nature of crossover comic stories like this is that they can't have too dramatic of an effect. They have to be fun, and I do think this leaned into it, even if it was just a little more meta than I would have liked personally. And I understand that's a taste issue for me rather than like an objective quality thing on that front. But moving on to the next stories in there was the Doctor Strange John Constantine crossover, which was written by 3 writers, which I thought was odd, but it was Josh Williamson, Scott Snyder, and James Tynion, and Hayden Sherman was on art, and man, Hayden Sherman was killing it there. Oh man, that is honestly, in a comic book with Dan Mora, that might be my favorite little story in there because of the magical nature of what got to go on there. And we got to see Dan Mora draw Dark Claw from Amalgam Comics, and that hits me in the nostalgia. I love that little moment. But man, Hayden Sherman was absolutely killing it in that story, and that is absolutely the highlight of that, because it's a fun enough story seeing John Constantine's personality and Doctor Strange get to like interact with each other, but the stakes of the story weren't exactly clear beyond there's a crossover messing with the magic worlds. You got Mephisto and Neron fighting each other, and somehow that's bad for both worlds, but the nature of the stakes weren't exactly clear. Same thing with the Swamp Thing Ghost Rider fight. Very fun, but the nebulous nature of why they're fighting or what's the problem with them fighting doesn't make as much sense if you think too hard about it. That being said, still fun. Hayden Sherman's art makes the story absolutely worth it. Next, we had the Tom Taylor, Bruno Renato. I hope I said his name right. I apologize if I did it. But yeah, they did work on Wolverine and Nightwing, and this was actually, I think, a solid little story. Like, of crossover stories in this issue, I think this was probably the one I think is the most solid in terms of, like, it gets what a crossover needs to do without necessarily, with, like, clear stakes, little clear character moments and everything, and the art was great because Bruno is amazing. I really like that. And yeah, I think that was probably the one where I was like, yeah, that's a good little story. I was satisfied with that. It's not like the most groundbreaking story in the world, but it was a fun story. I enjoyed it. Next, we had the I think it's the Hulk and Harley Quinn story that's next in that story. I could be misremembering the order. But yeah, that's a fun story by Mariko Tamaki and Amanda Connor on art. Yeah, I'm remembering that correctly. Yes. Yeah, that's a fun little story. I think that's mostly leaning in toward a more comedic thing. If I can see where that may not land as much for some people, if depending on if they like the humor of it or not. So it's really going to depend on your taste. I thought it was fun. It's not a bad story by any means. I do think it's weird, the idea of Harley Quinn and Hulk being the team up. I do still find that to be an odd pairing, but whatever. It's not the worst thing in the world. It's not a crime or anything. And then next we have the Miss Marvel and Static crossover, which this was the shortest out of them, and I think is the one I probably wanted the most out of when it comes to it, because like the Harley and Hulk one is like a fun comedic little bit, but it's also not serious by any means, whereas there is a little more emotional stake kind of built into the crossover of Static and Miss Marvel, because they're both teen heroes. They're talking about home and maybe potential romance, and it's very short, and there's like a little build up and then it just kind of stops. And I'm like, I really wish I had gotten more out of that one than I did with the comedy of the Harley Hulk crossover. So I kind of wish they had switched places in terms of the page count that they got, so that way we could get more out of it. But again, it wasn't bad. I do hope that Marvel and DC kind of follow up on that and give us maybe a little more of that crossover. Maybe they should continue these crossovers and follow up on some of these things. But yeah, overall, this issue was a good, fun story. It's worth picking up. Your mileage may vary on how entertaining you find the individual stories in it, but overall, this is worth it for the art alone. I highly recommend buying it, because it's a beautiful looking comic book, and that's, at the end of the day, what you want out of a comic book, is that it looks fantastic and tells a good story.